Hi everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and today I'm bringing you another Walk in the Walk. Today's game is Alan Wake, and as I've said in the past, these videos don't need to be just open world titles as long as the world or the levels are interesting and varied enough. Though, as you will see in this video, Alan Wake has far more in common with open world games than it does with other horror games like, say, Resident Evil. Now, as always, these videos are an artistic and game design discussion and not purely technical analysis. Will I talk about graphics? Yep. Will I spend hours dissecting texture resolution? Nope. So here we go. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe, maybe share it. I love this opening scene to Alan Wake because it does a good job solidifying the one thing that Alan Wake has over others, and that's the large open spaces that this horror game is going to be involved in. Now remember, this was an open world game at one time, and then Remedy themselves, despite what everybody else seems to think, Remedy themselves actually looked at it and decided against going open world, and they had some hilarious reasons why, reasons that I think only now are gamers starting to sort of understand. You know, a lot of us for a long time, every game that got announced, were like, man, I hope it's open world, and now many times you look at a game and you're like, this doesn't necessarily need to be open world. Well, technically Remedy was ahead of many people by a couple years, and it was really good for them to mention that. I love the graphics here. Everything here is real. You know, the one thing this has versus a Resident Evil or many other horror games is that feeling of openness. And it is funny how that open world aspect of the title actually made this not only feel unique, but it actually adjusted the game and how it was developed by Remedy themselves. Now, if people don't know much about Remedy's background, let me give you a little bit at least about their technical background. A good deal of Remedy's designers, developers, all of the people that work at Remedy, many of them actually come from the demo scene. Now, what's the demo scene? This is sort of a subculture that got brought up years and years ago. When games would be cracked, there would be an intro that you could see, and the intro was usually some little graphic and some music, and it sort of spawned this scene to where people were restricted to the amount of memory they could use in the game executable, but they had to make more and more developed and detailed demos, and it just became this thing, this way of tricking the computer using procedural stuff for the music, the textures, everything. And you can go online and you can look up demo scene and you can download some of these that are like 4096 bits. They're, I mean, just really, really small bytes. And when you upload it and look at it, I mean, people have made little demo shooters where the graphics actually look really good using, again, a bunch of procedural trickery to get full-fledged things out of these really small memory footprints. And funny enough, that's actually how a lot of the Remedy people are chosen. Remedy still goes to those events and still ends up meeting with people from those events, and even just here recently in the last couple years, they've actually got some people from the demo scene into their development community. Now, why does that matter? Well, we're going to see, and I'll show you, that there's a lot of cool technical stuff going on under the hood of Alan Wake, which I think many people who played it realized something unique was happening, but sometimes it's sort of difficult to identify. For example, the entire world is 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers, and it still exists on both the 360 and on the PC. And so later on, I'll show you some of that. There's so many places you can enter. All of them exist in this game world, in this game state, regardless if you're in them or not. It also, as you guys saw, that person running outside, the game world continues to exist. It feels much more like a Rockstar game where you're entering a building or some other open world game than it does a horror game. And I love that overall transition that you start to feel when you're playing this, where you just know something a little bit unique is actually occurring. Whether you like the title or not, you can tell that something different has occurred here. Now, we'll discuss a little bit about the research and the art discussion that actually occurs here. One of the things I really like about what they tried to do at Remedy was they wanted to basically get a town lost in time. They've gone on the record to saying they wanted sort of a town that, though this was occurring in the 2000s, they wanted something a little bit older. So they actually set it back about 20 years, went and made sure that the uniforms were correct for the sheriff, as well as that receptionist, or I'm sorry, that waitress that's behind the desk. It looks a little bit older. All of the clothing looks a little bit older, and I think that that's really cool. They decided to set it back, that world lost in time. Now, one of the things that happens here, and I think we can discuss it right from the starting, is that there was a lot of research that went into making this world appear real, making this world appear lived in, and appear like a place that you would actually see whatever time span you went to. So there was a lot of research done. One of the cool things is that they ended up sending teams to the Pacific Northwest. In fact, many times to Oregon. They looked at old Oregon ghost towns, Pacific Northwest ghost towns. They drove around 2,000 miles around Oregon and took around 40,000 photos that they've discussed. And it's funny because I actually have a family member who wrote a book about ghost towns. Oregon is known for a large number of ghost towns. And matter of fact, some of the locations that you go to in Alan Wake mimic things like the Bohemia ghost town and stuff like that that's actually in Oregon. And I think that that was really well done. They also sent some music people here into Oregon and had them sit out in a tent and record the sounds of the forest. And it's so weird to be from here and be somebody who loves to go, hiking or loves to go camping and to hear those different forest towns and be exactly the same. Something you might notice here is the deputy or the sheriff's love for coffee and his continual comments. I'm not quite sure if anybody knows this, but that is actually a Twin Peaks reference, but it's also a reference to the fact that at one time or another, additionally with the thermoses being collectibles, coffee was supposed to be your health. You were going to gather health from coffee. And this was before the light and darkness really took over the aspect of Alan Wake. And it makes much more sense having light and darkness and light being a healer, especially as the entire story is told within Alan Wake. But it's interesting to see those reminders and those memories sort of still living on within the game. Multiple coffee cups, people talking about coffee, and of course, again, that thermos collectible that's always around. And that Twin Peaks reference, that X-Files reference, but also the fact, again, that it was supposed to be health. It would have really made the game, I think, feel completely different. So here we are going up to the lake, and I'm not quite sure if anybody knows, but Crater Lake, of course, in Oregon is where they got Cauldron Lake for the game. The references are the same. Even the lodge at the crater edge is mimicked from the Crater Lake Lodge, and that was really cool. I thought that was awesome, especially, again, if you have lived in this area. They also went to Astoria, where The Ring was made, if people are aware of that, the horror movie The Ring, and, of course, Twin Peaks in Bend. So they took a lot of those ideas and a lot of that feeling of the Pacific Northwest and jammed it in here. Now, people have asked the question, though, is it based in Oregon or is it based somewhere else? Well, in the maps, and the maps also indicate an open world, and I can't wait to show you that, but in the maps, there is the allusion to the fact that this is actually in Washington somewhere. And that was an idea to basically move it out of Oregon because so many things were cribbed from different aspects and areas in Oregon. So they wanted to make it a fake place in Washington. And I think that ends up paying off, even as somebody from Oregon. Another cool little tidbit is the constellations are actually correct for living here in Oregon if you look up in the sky and for the time span and stuff like that. I thought that was great. No matter how old Alan Wake is, it looks amazing. Yes, you see some low textures definitely in places. I'm going to go ahead and walk up here and leave her behind. But just graphically, there is some really good lighting in this game. You see it throughout the entire title, that light and darkness. It really would never have been such a unique and awe-inspiring game had their lighting engine, let's say, not been as good as it is. But it's just really fantastic. And there's a reason why so many people were excited, especially when it was originally open world. So many people were excited to see this. Go ahead and run up here. The entire world exists, 10 kilometers by 10 kilometers. It still exists here, just locked out by them putting mountains in the way or things in the way. The lighting engine actually interacts with those aspects. So when you're looking at a mountain, you can see the same light reflected on those polygons that's on Alan Wake. Now, a lot of people might be like, wait, isn't that normal? No, it's not actually. In many games, they'll have fake backgrounds, and you can actually tell that they are fake. Even a game like, let's say, Far Cry 4, though there are some places you can go, there are many times where you see a mountain, and you can actually tell there's a slight, subtle change in color because one is basically a painting. And here in Alan Wake, almost everything is polygons, and you can see that lighting impact everything. You can see these god rays here coming through and actually interacting realistically with the land. Now, that demo scene stuff that I talked about, I think that's what we're seeing. I really do think that we're seeing some good prowess with understanding how to get the most out of the least. And remember, at this time, the PS3 and the Xbox 360 were big, and they were making this game for the Xbox 360 And of course, it wasn't as powerful as the PC, but at that time, the consoles were doing fairly well. And they got the game up and running on the 360 and really made it look good. Had a lot of different special effects going on. But of course, here on the PC, I think it just sings. If you have a chance to check this out on the PC, it's just really, really good looking. Now, Alan Wake, we can talk a little bit about his animations. Well, first of all, I want to ask if anybody else noticed. There is a very unique connection between this and In the Mouth of Madness. Now, In the Mouth of Madness is a movie with, of course, Sam Neill, the master of horror movies, who apparently just loves doing creepy characters. But his character and Alan Wake have a lot of similarities in the way they dress, aside from the hoodie that Alan Wake was given later underneath his tweed jacket. But the Levi's, the tweed jacket, the shoes, and In the Mouth of Madness, which also deals with a novelist and his story coming true. There's a lot of connections between those two characters' overall look. Now, that could also have to do with the time period when this was originally supposed to be created, and that certainly bears out. But it is unique, I think, to see that these two, one's a story and a movie, and one here within a video game. There's some similarities there, and it'd be interesting to see if there was some cribbing going on, if there was a little bit of additional atmosphere added to this game because of that movie. Just the multiple different layers of foliage. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but I love their use of different trees within different areas due to the way and the type of tree that would grow within different soil. And I think that that's really cool. It's all actually correct vegetation-wise, and that's awesome. These little, almost like you can just tell, they were either planted or just recently grew up. I love that. Bird Leg Cabin. Even though this is a lot like some games right now where we're on this contained island, there's still an openness to this, even just walking around, that you can feel. There's something about it, that open world aspect that it had, that trajectory that it was going for, or that heritage that it had, really did add to this title. In a lot of games, especially a linear style game, when you get behind something, I like to call it watching The Wizard of Oz, but when you get behind something and you look, you can see that things aren't necessarily as good looking as they're supposed to be, or you get behind something, there's no polygons being drawn, or it's low textures. It's great because in Alan Wake, you can go off the beaten path quite often, and every time you do, you still see it looks good. I love that little foreshadowing there. He talks about a love story gone wrong. And that he hopes another love story would go, would work out right now, and that would be him and his wife. I also think that even though it's a small, there I am trying to figure, sorry about that, I forgot. Even though it's a small issue, I love that the different generators require a different pull speed. It's stupid, right? It's small. But you're going to notice in Alan Wake, there is an extraordinary amount of variability. And the developer's gone on the record as saying that's one of the reasons why they have the light and shooting characters, and then different types of flashlights as you play the game, more powerful, less powerful, different types of shotguns, different types of weapons, because they wanted to continue having it variable. They didn't want you just walking into an area, pulling that exactly the same, having it timed, shooting a guy, just continually shooting people the exact same way. So what they did is they sort of went in there and added just enough variability that things felt a little different. And it's funny because I talk about this when I talk about Mad Max doing the same thing and removing a lot of the map mess that existed in Mad Max, because there was a little bit of variability in all those spots, while some games didn't do as good of a job, open world games. And Alan Wake does that, but in a horror style. Look at those graphics. It's so sweet. Again, a little bit about the demo scene. The volumetric fog that they have in here has to be some of the best fog I've ever seen. I'm going to show you some stuff, if I can get to that level within this time frame, that shows some of this volumetric fog. Right now, it's on purpose outside of the actual island, but you do get to travel right through it. It moves with wind currents. It's affected 3D. It can go through banisters. It's absolutely some of the best fog I've ever seen, and it's a very living, breathing entity. Indeed, you can see your light, your flashlight reflect off of it, and again, I think a lot of that comes from the fact that these guys really did hammer down that light and dark, but they also have that background in creating their own stuff. There was no Unreal or Havoc that they wanted to use. They wanted to create their own thing. And by doing so, the game may have a couple weaknesses in other areas, but what you see is a fairly tech-heavy game that still runs pretty well. And I think, especially when you consider, and I'm talking about on the Xbox 360, on the PC, of course, it runs just as fine as you want it to be, depending on whatever power you throw at it. Oh, and another thing. There's so many similarities to The Fog. John Carpenter's The Fog, one of my favorite horror movies of all time. The original, by God, not the remake. You know, I talk about him a lot when I'm talking about games because I do feel that many video game developers, especially horror peeps, they grew up probably on a lot of John Carpenter stuff. Also, John Carpenter's a big video game lover, so I got to give him props whenever I can, but I just love the connection. Adrienne Barbeau, at that time married to John Carpenter, was a character who was actually a lighthouse/radio DJ jockey host. And she was out there, and she would actually help the characters in the movie by telling them where the bad guys were and all this kind of stuff and where the fog was, right? So in Alan Wake, you see an incredible similarity between that and the radio announcements and the radio announcer that you have within Bright Falls and within the game Alan Wake. And I think that's really enjoyable. And I'm telling you, if you get a chance, listen to every single one of those radio discussions. They're a great mix of like X-Files and Small Town. So this is gonna, right here is gonna sort of start out the beginning of the game and the sort of the argument. I guess you get to see a lot of the relationship that occurs between Alice and Alan. It's funny because if you talk to the developers, if you've heard them talk, they discuss how difficult it was to get Alice correct. They wanted a character that was not only strong on her own, but also had a little bit of vulnerability there, especially with like, having that phobia of the dark. It was interesting. They ended up screening 200 people. They got somebody, and then right at the end, they ended up having some miscommunication with that actress and had to get somebody else to do the voice. I think the person who does Alice does a really good job, especially because you have to have a connection between Alice and Alan, especially throughout the game, as Alan's entire reason for moving throughout all of this horror is to save Alice. And right now, we see this relationship that looks like it's sort of on the rocks. You see a relationship where, let's be honest, Alan is sort of a puss. He's sort of a guy who is consistently whiny. He's got all of these issues. He's basically just completely emo. And so it's difficult at times to like Alan. But you start to find out later that, this is a guy who's mired in somewhat of a long-term relationship. And, so, as they say, familiarity breeds contempt. That's not what they have for each other, but there is, they do feel a little familiar. Oh, got to get the birds. Another, of course, Hitchcock-style connection here. The flashlight technology in this game is great. It actually throws correctly. A lot of games we play with the flashlight goes 7 feet. You've heard me complain about it multiple times in other games. In this game, it's just done really well. I love this. This is it. This is that moment, almost a Hitchcock moment, almost a Stephen King moment, where everything goes to shit. That's your everything goes to shit moment, where he leaps into that water. There's something about that that's sort of like we are now traveling from the somewhat normal world to Alan Wake's just effed up place and state of being.
Waking up in the crashed car felt like I had woken from one night.
Yeah, see, he even says that. It's great.
I couldn't remember how I got there. All I knew was that something terrible had happened to Alice.
Now,
the phone was dead.
There is some disconnection here. You're just it's sort of jarring. You're suddenly in a car wreck. Like you leapt into water. Was there a car under the water? You jumped in it, and then it was flipped up into the air. Like there's some difficulty with that translation, that transition there. But it is explained later. But I can see some people were like, "What the hell? This makes no sense." But it's not necessarily not supposed to make sense. It's that the game is played future, past, past, future. You're playing it, and then you sort of see some comebacks. You see some different things that sort of call back to past situations, and things start to make sense in a horror movie aspect. I love this look. Again, the technology here is absolutely, to me, is incredible. That knowing right now that all of these places can be seen. That you can go there, you see it, you see this gas station, it exists within that game world right now. It's not a backdrop, it's not a background. The entire world at all times is still existing, just different sectioned off. And there's that layering that occurs within this title that is absolutely stupendous. My hat's off to these guys, because as somebody who, like I said, does go hiking, does go camping, even the trails look right, and that layering of different vegetation. This is cool. Boom. Sort of another little precursor, like, Alan, your life is shit. Also, of course, we can talk about Alan Wake's name. Alan Wake. It's a command to a person. A lot of people didn't pick up on that, but you can sort of understand where the game's going when you realize that it's like Alan, wake up, Alan Wake. I liked that. I also like the duality of Bright Falls. One is, of course, ascending term, bright, and one is a descending term, fall. I love that mixture of the two together. You know, a lot of games do that. Wayward Pines, you know, they if you notice, there's a lot of titles that are sort of like that. But I did like Bright Fall. I thought that was a unique, sort of a unique connection, because falls could mean falling down, but it also could mean, you know, like, does this place have very nice sunny fall time as a season? You know, you never know. I like that connection. I love that look. Just absolutely incredible.
Hello? Is someone there?
It's funny how many times you play a game and the cutscenes are modeled differently than the location, as in whether they have more detail, less detail, whatever. I love how all of this is connected. It's what you see is what you get. The cutscene is within the same area but just rendered out, and so it continues to make you feel like you're still there. And yeah, there is a little bit more post-processing and higher detailed textures going on and stuff like that, but it still feels like you're in that location. It's interesting when you understand just the amount of work that was going on for this title. When you talk to the sound and music people in video games, you find out that many times, you know, that's the first place where something's cut. One of the cool things that occurred with Alan Wake is because they were being published by Microsoft, they got to use Microsoft's Sound Design Lab as well as all of their sound samples. There's about 1,700 sound effects and 1,500 voiceovers, but I think the sound effects are the more important thing right now to discuss, especially out here. As I said before, they did ship somebody out to the actual Pacific Northwest to sit in a tent and record days upon days of sounds. Everything from the wind, the trees, the birds, the water, and even the sound of damp earth as it cools down. Somebody who is from a place where there's a lot of different temperature variance between daytime and nighttime. You will actually hear that at night. You can hear that the earth getting cooler, and you can hear this wet, soggy, squishy sound as that earth contracts and expands. It's just super awesome, man. I mean, such an amazing amount of detail went into this. Also, audio-wise, the surround sound is absolutely epic. They do a lot of different variability for when you're walking and using different sound effects. Just really good, clear, crystal clear sound, and a really good sound separation. If you get a good set of headphones or a good set of 5.1 speakers, you can really hear that sing in your ears. I love the clarity that was going on there. Here we see something that we're going to see mimicked throughout all of Alan Wake, and that is the twisting, turning paths. That was done for multiple reasons. One, it was a design decision to, again, truncate space. I've talked about this in past videos about compression, making sure places feel like they're a little farther than the way they are. I actually feel like Alan Wake does a really, really good job with that. In fact, one of the better games, you know, and even though it's a horror game and even though it's technically not open world, you're still seeing some open world spaces here and there that aren't straight lines. Man, I'm telling you, if you go and you play a lot of other horror games, you'll realize just how straight line everything is. It's just a straight shot. And here, not only is it not a straight shot, but as you can see here, you can go off the beaten path. And this is a game that absolutely pays off when you go off the beaten path. For example, there's later levels where they say go here, and if you don't go directly where they're stating and you go off to the left and right, all kinds of secrets abound. Tons of secrets, hints about other games, you know, items that you can pick up, of course, collectibles, as we've discussed before, you know, just different hints about other movies and titles that are within the horror genre. Really, really cool. As somebody who's worked in a wood mill, this is awesome. It's so crazy. You know, I come from a small town. There was only 5,000 people in it, and it was one of its major things was wood production. Of course, in the Pacific Northwest, that was a big deal, especially 60s, 70s, 80s, and all of this equipment and everything is so real.
Coral Stucky. Pleased to meet you. Non-refundable reservation deposit required.
I love those one-liners. Now, here's some more stuff about sound effects. The bad guy's dark presence was actually the opposite of normally going with scary sounds that game designers would normally do. So when those guys are announced and you hear that disconcerting sound, the game designers didn't get normal stuff. They actually, or didn't get abnormal stuff. They didn't get like metal, rending or something like that a lot of game designers would do. What they actually did was they got normal sounds and then they tweaked them. So, for example, when Alan is attacked and there's that introductory sound that sounds a little shrill and like an undercurrent, that's actually the sound of babies beginning to cry. And then they slowed it down and modulated it. And now, whether you believe in subliminal sound work or if that actually makes sense, there is some fairly solid science behind the ability of people to pick up on sounds that are disturbing, whether they're sped up or slowed down. And that was also mixed with the sound of kittens crying. And if anybody has raised cats, and I have, you have a litter of kittens. When you hear kittens crying for milk, or just crying, it's a cute sound, but it also can be vaguely disturbing. And that was mixed and also adjusted. It was mixed with the baby crying sound, and it was all added together, processed, and then that's what actually is playing. That's what you're hearing when those characters are being introduced. This voiceover here is stupendous. Let's just listen.
Incontestably proven health benefits let you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You can see the sights and keep those cholesterol levels down.
Yes.
Bright Falls Sheriff Station.
So, one of the things I love about that, and again, it's in The Fog. If you watch The Fog, there's a moment in The Fog when a piece of wood from the pirate ship floats up in the water. The child grabs it, and they basically take it back to the lighthouse, and some water gets spilled on it, salt water, and it basically talks. It like gives out, I can't remember, I think it's a little bit of a diary or journal entry. And that's actually really creepy, that sound. I also love this physical movement of the world. And again, turning back here, look at this. So sweet. All that physics movement, all of those connections to the real world, none of it canned. That's what's so great about this title and what just makes it feel so alive. Again, if you guys get a chance and you don't have some issue with this title that I'm not aware of, jumping onto this on the PC or hell, even on the 360, if you've never got a chance to play this, I'm going to tell you right now, I think you're missing a really good game.
My head pounded with the concussion. I'd never fired a gun outside a shooting range, and now I just killed someone.
There's a duality going on with the storyline with Alan Wake, Bright Falls, Alan Wake, light and dark. There's all these dualities, but one of the things I really do like is the connection to a lot of Stephen King stuff. Stephen King, he talks about it. Alan actually talks about it within the game world, but additionally, you can see a lot of connections. For example, a lot of what's going on here reminds me a little bit of The Dark Half, Stephen King book. The Dark Half is a book about a person who wrote under a pseudonym for years and decided to pretend to kill that pseudonym. So they make a fake tombstone and all this stuff. Well, as always in a Stephen King book, something happens, and that pseudonym, that character, comes alive. He basically, that ghost author comes alive. And of course hunts down the main character, and there's some similarities here as well. There's a lot of Stephen King feeling to this title. There's, as I said, there is some feeling of In the Mouth of Madness as well. There's also a little bit of ancient folklore that the developers have talked about, Baba Yaga and a couple other things, especially the older female who is the dark presence, or at least controlled by the dark presence in this title. When you mix fictional with real historical fictional, of course, talking about Baba Yaga versus, let's say, Stephen King, there's a cool connection that can happen there. You know, I love that different when you get those two things. One that's we know is completely fictional, and then one is this historical, traditional heritage horror story, and mix them together. It sort of can fake a realness there. It can sort of lend itself to feeling more realistic, even though it's not. This place sort of introduces you to that volumetric fog as we're now for the first time really walking through it and seeing that light, the interplay of that light beam bounce off of it. And it doesn't choke you out yet, but later it'll start choking out that light. It'll start making it so the light doesn't travel as far. And it's funny because it's such a subtle way to do game design, but to add a little bit of difficulty, you give somebody you give a character this power, this light, and then, you know, through an environmental effect that seems very natural, you remove a little bit of its power, or at least a little bit of its ability to allow the main character to see. Those character one-liners add so much atmosphere. If you follow the characters within the game, you can always tell who that is by those one-liners, as long as they're main characters. Side characters will have stuff about farming, but some of the main characters will have some really hilarious ones like Stucky did. Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and jump to farther along level, I think, so we can also skip a couple plot points here, so I don't spoil it for anybody. Now, this is part of the New York flashback that shows you what Alice and Alan were like, and there's different flashbacks that occur here, and sadly enough, or not sadly enough, happily enough, they didn't get cut. That CCTV constantly makes me question, because CCTV, if you take that and change it to actually CC, the letter CCTV, it's obviously closed caption and it's used for recording people, and there's something that's almost vaguely like there's a hint there, like, are we being watched? And you also see that, of course, with the TVs, and I don't know if that's a hint or if they just decided to put SEE there, but it just seems like maybe I'm reading too much into it. But this just shows some of the connection between Alice and the husband. And we can talk a little bit about music. I'm not quite sure if anybody knows this, but one of the things I love about the themes for these characters is the artist who put together, the musician who put together the music for these characters made sure that their music was very different. For example, Alice's is much more dynamic, much more almost a variable music. It's not as regimented in its musical scoring, while Alan's theme is a little bit more so. Alan is a guy made of, let's be honest, he's made of patterns. He is a character who needs specific patterns. It's one of the reasons why he's failing at writing right now. She is a character who needs that flexibility for them to be together, even though she has this fear here, but needs that flexibility. Otherwise, you know, they probably get divorced. She needs to, and you see that with a lot of relationships. One person who's a little bit more controlled and orderly, and the other one who's not. What's great about it is when they're together, that music actually mends together. Those two themes mend together and dynamically, and I just think that's awesome. Such a cool idea, probably very difficult to write.
I used to have these nightmares when I was a kid. The dark really spooked me too. When it got really bad, my mom gave me this old light switch. She called it the clicker.
The clicker?
This clicker story is real, by the way. President or CEO, whatever, of Remedy, and the main writer, that's actually a real story from his childhood, where his parents gave him a clicker because he was afraid of the dark, and he put that in the story. He spent 2 weeks at a cabin out in the middle of the woods trying to sort of get the feeling of Alan Wake and write all this out. And you know, some writers will tell you never ever put yourself in a story. Other writers will say, you know, I put myself in the story all the time. It just depends on who does what. But I think here it paid off very well. You know, it's almost cheesy, right? But knowing that it is an actual real thing that a kid did, there's something very real about it. And it sort of lodges Alan and his wife as real characters. Because again, if that was not done, there would be no reason for Alan to continue. Or there would be, but it wouldn't be with such drive that he shows.
I'm okay. My head's fine. I had to lie about my headache and memory loss. He'd send me to a hospital.
here, this doctor who's in, as I said, if you get a chance, listen to those radio broadcasts, listen to the late night radio show. This character shows up many times in a great storytelling bit. He continually talks about the things that you see within this room, like the fish and fishing, and he uses fishing analogies. It just does such a great job tying everything together. Now here, of course, is the open world map. They left it in the game, but you can see just by looking that this game was at one time open world. This map is an open world map. It would have been your HUD map, I'm sure, had this been open world. Now, I talked before about why they didn't do open world, and I think Remedy saw some things and really made a good decision when it comes to removing free world from this title.
I'm sorry you had to cut
They were
your morning
basically
fishing
looking
short
at
with
the
this.
game design and they were like, okay, so let's say we get told that we need to go meet somebody somewhere. Everything starts up, the music starts up, everything starts to feel atmospheric, and then the main character decides, well, instead of actually going there, I'm going to do some logging missions. And I thought that that was hilarious. For me, at least, it absolutely fits with this title. They did a good job. Of course, these are the developers here, and all these missing. These are the characters from the actual, or developers from behind the scenes. All little tidbits about them. We've seen this in prior games by these guys. I think that was a really good fit. What you end up getting is a game that feels like none other. In fact, I wish more games would do something like this, like begin one way and then switch it up, because, you know, we have seen failures in the past that way, but here, it offers us a horror tale like no other, and whether you like it or dislike it, the understanding that that world exists right out that door, it matters. It can help.
How did you end up at Stucky's gas station?
I wanted to tell her what had happened last night, but I couldn't. She'd lock me up. Excuse me, I need to take this. Hello?
Alan, please help me.
Alice?
Stop talking to the law. You'll do exactly what I say if you ever want to see your wife again.
Who is this?
Go to the back lot. There's a hole in the fence on the left. Look inside the junker. I left a little something there to convince you we're all on the same page here. After you ditch the cops, you're gonna meet me in Elderwood National Park. There's a spot called Lover's Peak. Midnight. Don't do nothing stupid, pal. We're watching you.
I need some fresh air. Can I go out?
All right,
In the back?
we'll go ahead and
Of course,
I'll keep
Mr.
playing.
Wake, I
We'll go to another
understand.
spot.
You can
Kidnapped. Anything
And of course, we've seen Barry prior, but this is when Barry sort of comes into his own. Barry is that character. He's that serious foil. He's somebody who's supposed to be sort of goofy and jokey. What's so great about it is his desire to believe you. Again, looking at her, you can see that lost in time aspect.
Wow, I was just thinking about you too.
Great.
I was just bringing Rusty some coffee. He's on the balcony, looking after Max. Poor thing. I really need to go.
Here's one of the things we find out. Alan's a douchebag. Alan's basically, at times, a dick. And that's one of the things that makes him so real. You know, he continually hammers on that chick. He continually talks bad about her. And Barry's the one who has to defend this person. And you realize as you're playing this game that without Barry, Alan Wake would be a much more difficult character to not only like, but one to really understand. Barry not only gives historical information, which is a really good ploy from the game developer's standpoint, he also is one of those characters that makes you sort of understand that Alan Wake by himself isn't really that enjoyable. Alan Wake with his wife or Alan Wake with Barry, that's a complete person. And we see those type of people in real life where they need others. Alan is, you know, he is an isolationist, and he is somebody who likes to be by himself, but he almost likes to be by himself as long as he knows someone's still there. And it's great. He's a douchebag. He's a dick. Halfway through the game, you're like, there's a lot to dislike about this character, but you also feel for him. You feel for him within his environment, and when you have people like Barry and his wife explaining what's actually occurring, you can feel for this guy, not only because of bad things happening to him, but because he's not necessarily socially equipped to deal with a lot of humanity itself and how things actually occur around him and how people actually act. I love this location. You're first introduced to this now. Just so scenic. And as you notice, they didn't go nuts, but they sort of layered in different trees there with the fall, that orange and green. Did such a great job here.
Oh, Mr. Wake. I'd shake your hand, but mine are kind of full here.
And once again, they don't foreshadow it by saying, here's a guy who puts down traps. They foreshadow this by showing this dog that's been caught in a bear trap and him talking about it. And then later, you finding out that that can actually trap you. It's just that one step. You know, many people, show don't tell, you hear those kind of things. Well, this is showing the show, right? It's not just one step, it's two steps removed. And there's a subtlety there that doesn't exist in a lot of other games. In fact, many other games would hand you that and say, here's a trap, use it on others, but watch out, they can use it on you, and that would be it. There's a layering that occurs here. There's a subtlety to some of the storytelling. All right, let's jump.
Thanks. Can you tell me?
All right, we've jumped a bit. Let's listen to this.
Mulligan, Thornton, come in. Over. Thornton here. James, we got both Wheeler and Rose in custody. They didn't put up a fight or anything. Why, they were... Hey, Mulligan, what are you doing? Come on. Sit down and give me that. James, Mulligan here. Over. Go ahead, Mulligan. Over. We got Wheeler and Rose here. Wheeler's drunk or hopped up on something. Speaking of which, that Fed had a pretty distinctive whiff of Otis Scotch about him, you know what I mean? Over.
Now here is where we sort of start seeing some of the stuff between the two deputies, and I really love that. It's sad because the sheriff's deputies on the radio actually had a much larger part, and a lot of that had to be cut. It wasn't even prepped. They basically had this idea and then they sort of had to cut it. And it's too bad because they're constantly at odds. If you listen to these radio discussions, especially the first time, I skipped it, but the first time when we're in the jail, you can turn on the radio there and you can hear the characters talking. It's hilarious. They're just constantly on each other. But that sort of speaks to some things. There's a lot of stuff that was cut from Alan Wake that was actually built in. There was a really cool seaplane ride that they talk about where they had another location that was sort of outside of the main area that Alan took a seaplane to, and they had this really cool out-of-his-mind main pilot, and unfortunately, they had to cut that. They ended up moving it on, and that was really sad because that would have been a really interesting thing to see. So here we're a ways past where I stopped recording last time because I wanted to show you guys some of, again, that twisting trail, but we're going to end up going up towards the radio station, which is one of my favorite locations. Unfortunately, many of the locations I felt in Alan Wake were a little misused. You had these larger locations like the radio station and police station and others that just weren't as used as I would have liked. They do a good job of separating daytime and nighttime and making at times you feel safer. The radio station, I really had this awesome idea that you were going to go up there and you were going to talk to this guy for a little bit. There was going to be some interesting stuff that happened. But we are getting into that middle section, almost the middle section of the title, and so they pushed forward a little quicker than I would have liked. But that's just me. Remedy did a good job with the variability I talked about before, and you get some here. We start up this generator here. I believe this is the first one that actually stops. It conks out, and you have to kick it to keep it going. It's so funny because it's just that one little thing, right? Matter of fact, a lot of us gamers, when we're playing a game, will be like, really? This thing runs? It hasn't been started. The gasoline's old, whatever. But at the starting of Alan Wake, everything just sort of works, and then, oh yeah, here we go. Yeah. So it went out. The light turned out, and you're like, wait, what? This has never happened before. Little tiny things like that. And instead of something crazy, which we have seen that before in games, where you have to do this giant quest, you kick it and start it again. Very small, just a little bit of a difference there. A little bit of a thing to add in, a little bit of a variability. And I've talked about that in other titles where I've said that the more variability you get, the more you can keep the gamer at odds with the reality and make them constantly question what's going to come up. In many ways, this begins to remind me of the Cradle, which is in Thief. That's a level in Thief 3 that won so many awards, and I know a lot of people didn't necessarily love Thief 3, but the Cradle was a game, or was a level that started out in an insane asylum, and you find out that the things that kept you safe, I've done a video on this in the past, but the things that kept you safe and the places where you got strength turn against you there. This is a haunted house, a house that's alive that basically wants to kill you. And the shadow isn't necessarily the safe place anymore because this is a place of shadows, and a place of shadows finds that its strength. As Bane said, you've become accustomed to the dark. I was born in it. Garrett's become accustomed to the dark. But this house is the dark. It is born of it. And that's one of the things I like about Alan Wake is the same thing begins to happen. Daylight starts to not necessarily feel safe. Things, the variability that's added continually means that there's honestly always a feeling of change. And I discussed that when I discussed the Cradle and Garrett, where after that level, it subtly adjusted the way you played the game in the future because you were never quite sure if some rug was going to be pulled out from under your feet. Same thing happens in Alan Wake. The entire time there's enough variability that you're always wondering, will this work? And it's not in the typical boss fashion where you fight a boss and they're suddenly impervious to every item that that you've had, and you're just sitting there going, what's going on? No, instead, it's where you just have to try things differently. You have to use your imagination. You have to use your intelligence. And you get new weapons. I was just going to say, you start getting new weapons. For example, now you get flashbangs. You start getting things that also adjust the variability within your own inventory and ability, and that allows you to think outside the box. Do you use your flares? Do you use the flash gun, the flashbangs? Do you use your flashlight? Haha! Oh, okay. Shouldn't have celebrated so soon. Damn. Oh. Suck it. Okay, there's some light. Let's be honest. Alan Wake has serious lung cancer. He can only run for about 7 feet. It's if there's anything I absolutely hate about Alan Wake, and it's plain and simple, his inability to run very long distances. It's not only unrealistic, it's just stupid. I absolutely hate that design decision. Let's see what this one is.
With Pat Maine.
It's Milt Peabody, Pat.
What's on your mind, Milt?
Well, I live near the trailer park, Pat.
So, if you guys remember, prior to this, and I didn't show you guys that because there was too many bits to it that I felt that were sort of story spoilers, but you go to this trailer park and some really cool shit happens, and I love that they constantly talk about it here. They talk about it on the radio, and then they talk about it in the actual cutscene. It's very cool.
Because it's just next door, and they're popping off guns there.
They're still shooting?
No, it was maybe 10, 15 minutes ago. It sounds serious, Pat. I'm telling you.
It doesn't sound like no party. I love the characters, inflections, and the way they talk. Also, the guy on the radio, perfect voice for radio. Absolutely love it. This looks dangerous. Oh, it is dangerous. Holy shit. I love how the flashbangs either have a timer or they go off when they touch an enemy, so they can be used in different ways. It's a great scene here. That flashlight beam playing off not only the fog but the land around it, as well as having, if you look at the way flashlights are made, you have the bright light coming from the center and of course the reflected light around the edges. It's so funny how many games get flashlights wrong. How do you get a flashlight wrong? But, I wouldn't say this is perfect, but, oh, jeez, I shouldn't have done that. There's something so cool about dropping those flashbangs and just as an enemy is about to attack you, watching him just take a dirt nap. Of course, now, if people are seeing that fluorescent arrow, that's basically hints to the place for a cache of items, usually a couple guns or a couple bullets and some flares. This is also one of the first areas where you basically come out of an area after making it safe. You're basically making this safe. Now, this has been done before where you've made it safe because you've started a generator. There's something about coming out of this cave and having this location bright now and being like a place to where you could retreat if you had to. A lot of the other places, the way they were built, you were sort of going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, right? There was almost never a desire to return. But we start to see now there's some areas that are a little bit farther away, and if I had wanted to return after defeating those guys, I could. And it's just a different feel to it. One more added change that they do the more you play this title. I love the fact that you're just sitting there going, how did this car get out here? Like, what's going on? Is it that tornado? Or, I mean, what's actually occurring? Bad guy. Now, normally, if I wasn't doing a walking the walk, I might take those guys out with my flashlight, because I find that keeping those flashbangs for later, especially when you have to fight like a dump truck made of shadow and hate, it helps to have those flashbangs. But right now, not too bad. The wind blowing through these trees done really well. There's some issues with how the models handle the wind. It's a little faked, but especially when you see them layered across the top of each other, there's some seriously cool uncanny valley going on there, and I don't mean that in the bad way. Now we come out into this section, that still 1950s look to everything with the neon. I do find it funny that the radio station sign is basically pointing out into nowhere. It's pointing to a mountain. Like, I'm not quite sure why he wanted to announce he was a radio station to a mountain, but it's like not facing a freeway or anything. Here we go. This game does fall, I think, to the same weakness that many horror games fall to, where there's not enough characters in the game world. You know, especially with Alan Wake, I think they do a somewhat good job of explaining why that is, especially at the end of the title. So as you notice, yes, I did jump. One of the reasons is because I didn't want to spoil that cutscene there. There's definitely some stuff that occurs that, you know, I'd rather not spoil it and rather sort of get it out of the way, move on. Here, of course, we're starting to see that daytime isn't necessarily safe. This is a safe walk here. But we are starting to notice that in the daylight, you know, we will start seeing enemies. You've got that. Not only do you have the volumetric fog, which impacts the sun that they have shining, but you also have, of course, real-time clouds, or real-time in the fact that they're being calculated. They're not dynamic. I believe they're the same cloud cover that you'll see each time. But I do like the fact that you can see the change. There we go. Now you've got the sunnier aspect. And it feels like, you know, walking out as somebody who, you know, like I said, I live in the Pacific Northwest. You see that kind of thing quite often with cloud cover just constantly, especially in stormy times, you know, going from somewhat dark to super sunny to somewhat dark, and many times rain, no rain, rain within the same 6, 7, 8 minute time frame. I also like the fact that as you're walking, there are these sedate times in Alan Wake, and they're done on purpose. They're done not only to break up the actual action and the story itself, but also they give you a moment to reflect, especially if you haven't beat the game, and sort of question that composition of the story and what's going on. You know, is Alan Wake completely nuts? Is he not? Is this in his head? And you get those moments of respite, those moments of comfort where you can think through the title. And I had played this originally with Cadiz and a couple other people, and through that entire time I was playing it, there were times where we would pause for a moment. We would just discuss the game world and, you know, always question exactly what was going on. And there's few games that really question what was going on. You know, I'm a fan of horror games. I do play quite a few of them, but many of them are just so in your face with either gore, where they're just gore porn and you're like, yeah, whatever, or they're done in a fairly linear fashion. Most of the Resident Evils are that way. Or they're done in a way to where there's a lot of, because of translation issues, if they were based not in English, for me, they were based in Japan or something like that, you can get some weird translation issues where you're like, you know, just the vocals, the speaking is done poorly. And it's funny because this is a multinational group. Remedy, though they are based, I believe, in Finland, they have like 11 or 12 different nationalities represented, and many of them non-English speakers. But their writing is some of the better writing that I've seen for a horror game in a long, long time. I love that log rolling back and forth. Oh, also, this is where you start seeing the poltergeist. The poltergeist, of course, was created because the game had a physics bug, and that physics bug caused particular items to shake really fast. Now, if anybody's played an Unreal game, especially an older one, or a lot of games, they'll have occasional physics shaking. I call it the Skyrim shake, because in Skyrim it was really bad in particular places. In Whiterun, for example, you would have items shaking on tables, items just jiggering quickly. Well, the thing is many times, depending on the game, the mass of that item, they can kill the main character if you touch it. It's happened in prior titles. Well, in Alan Wake, the same thing happened. So what they did was they said, screw it, we're not going to fix it. We are going to have a poltergeist in the game. And that is the creation. That's how those moving objects became a bad guy in the game, was by a physics bug. And I think that's great. Here we go. Let's see what they say.
And you're listening to KBFFM. Folks, I want to apologize for kind of abandoning you to that looping music track last night, but I was detained. You see, I encountered a big-shot G-man with an itchy trigger finger who could use a lesson in manners and a boot in the ass. Not necessarily in that order either. Now, folks...
Once again, that telling of the story via third person and via other people talking about you is so great.
Right now, because some people just shouldn't be carrying badges. I'm just glad that our Sheriff Breaker was there to straighten things out. And if someone I met last night is listening...
And then him hinting to you.
I'm pretty sure you're not the bad guy here. Godspeed, son. I hope you know what you're doing. Now, on a lighter note, I'll be talking to Dr. Nelson.
And he's going to be talking to Dr. Nelson. As I told you guys, Dr. Nelson ends up on this channel quite often. It's very, very interesting. Those two characters talking to each other about love and life is actually one of the more enjoyable parts of the game. I just love listening to them discuss things. As you can see, this is a massive section too. So you can go left and right. You can go all over this area. And a lot of people consider this, especially if you, like, let's say load up the game and you haven't played in a while and you play this level, you could go, man, this is a long time where, you know, nothing's happening. Now, you can't, there are ways to get in a car and stuff, but I just wanted to walk. But one thing I wanted to point out is something that I thought was really interesting is that Remedy changed their entire handling of game testing when they were making Alan Wake. And one of the reasons why is, especially a horror game, in a horror game, you sort of have to play it all the way through, because if you played any different aspect of a horror game separately, you might find a place really slow, too action-packed, what have you. I talked about this in Fallout 4, where they sent out teams to walk through Fallout 4 and identify something was too cluttered, not cluttered enough. But they were walking through the entire world. Well, Alan Wake playtesters were given specific spots to play, including, of all things, the trailer park, which unfortunately I couldn't show you. What happened was they kept getting really negative feedback. They kept getting feedback that areas were too slow and they couldn't figure out why. So they did some investigation. They found out that basically it's because they were having people split up their gameplay moments. They were playing a boring part without a poignant moment before it or an action-packed moment, and the person was reporting it was slow. And so luckily they ignored that once they started realizing what was going on, and they've now changed their entire way of game testing to where they have a more holistic approach to game testing, somebody testing their levels. I think that that's incredibly valid. It's the same thing as I discussed with Fallout 4. That's the way things should be tested, because if you jump into a game and you play just a little bit, it can actually suck. In fact, there's been many times where I've told a person, hey, this game I want to show you is really awesome, and I jumped into what appears to be an awesome moment, but because that person has no experience with that title, they may look at that and go, yeah, that's really not that cool. They may not see the foreshadowing or the tying in of story or some change in the location and why that should matter to them, aside from me just explaining it. And that never works as good as actually seeing it within the title. Now, I've jumped forward because, again, I don't want that spoiler to come. This is one of my favorite spots in the game, probably one of my favorite levels within the entire title, and that's the I guess you would call it the insane asylum for artists, but you could call it whatever you want. Oh, what the hell? Holy crap. Physics got messed up and that chair almost killed me. Death by IKEA. So most of this, none of this will be spoiler. We'll hint at some things, but I think we're going to be okay here. And what it says, what you read here is, I'll just say this is not necessarily the truth. Actually, I'm going to skip forward for a second. Okay, I wanted to skip forward a little bit. Love this location. One of the things that you notice a lot of times is there's a couple references to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, like they talk about Jack taking the people out for a fishing trip and all this stuff. There's actually many Shining references, just all kinds of popular media references. Remedy has made it pretty clear. They haven't been sort of scared of pointing out the fact that they want to be known as not just a video game company. And at minimum, want their games to be more than just video games. I want them to be sort of more cinematic. Love that. Look at that. That is so cool. The texture work on that, even for an older title, is great. And of course, here we are on a lodge, again, that mimics the lodge at Crater Lake, but here at Cauldron Lake. Let's listen to this and some of the sound effects.
Isn't it? Cauldron Lake spread below us. I could see Mirror Peak on the other side of the lake. I thought I could make out the spot where Diver's Isle had been when I arrived with Alice. Now there was nothing but waves.
It seems there's a storm coming. Funny, I don't recall there being a mention of that in the weather forecast. Well, no matter. This way. Follow me. Alan, what I'm telling you is good news. Right now, we're in control. Every time you have a relapse, it gets more and more difficult to resurface from the dark depths of your imagination. Not surprising, considering your profession. Imagination is what you work with. After all your nightmares, this should come as an immense relief to you. If it doesn't, why is that? Because I'm lying? Or because you don't want to admit that you're not well?
Okay. Yeah, that's such a great environmental soundtrack going on here. And again, as I stated, they went out there and they recorded a lot of this directly from the Pacific Northwest. You can really pick up on it. So we're going to jump forward from here because there's some characters here that we'll see later, but I don't really necessarily want you to see them now. And of course, here we are at the famous or infamous farm. So Barry's down at the farm. Basically, this moment here is me having to find them. Gonna have to find a way around to the farm. Al will be waiting.
Barry, just wait for me, okay? Al, I'm not staying here. It's suicide. I'm going to the farm. I'm gonna go ahead and...
Barry's so great. I'm gonna secure the area. He just becomes this really interesting character. And you know, Alan jokes around and says that he's Rambo. There's something here, if you understand storytelling, though. Many times the main character is Rambo, right? Many times that happens. Well, here, there's that ability to have a different character taking care of things that makes you, once again, wonder about what's going on. It's Barry that's doing a lot of things. Barry, and if you talk to people, especially when this game first came out, and you talk to them about who their favorite character is, many times Barry is the one that they mentioned, just without a shadow of a doubt. Not that they didn't like Alan, but that Barry was so interesting because he comes across as this comedic foil, as I said, or not foil, but this comedic character. And instead, he turns out to be somebody who is incredibly resourceful. And though he starts out, I would say, questioning a little bit about Alan Wake's sanity, he turns out to be especially through most of the game, he turns out to be Alan's best friend, his staunch supporter. And it's funny because you get this story. This is a scout, an agent, basically. He's Alan Wake's agent, which, you know, in most movies and most books, you know, the agent is a slimeball unless it's Jerry Maguire. Well, he was a slimeball at the starting. This Barry is the Jerry Maguire later in that movie. He's the guy who is friends with his actual talent, and he really does like this guy, and even to the point of almost, I guess you would say, loving him. Okay, here we go with the poltergeist. Now again, this was completely a mistake, an error in the physics rendering, and they decided they're just going to leave it in, program it in. So they did that, and you have these really cool poltergeists. You have another character enemy. And I love the fact that, once again, it turns the environment against you. Something that I discussed about the Cradle and Thief. But here in Alan Wake, the environment, though it's always been against you, hasn't moved around, right, for the most part. Now you have these barrels and stuff just flying towards you, and you have to figure out what you're going to do. Alan's a resourceful dude, though, using that light right there. And then causing those things to come in front of that light and blow up right away. Very intelligent. Of course, got to get the manuscripts, even though I've played this like 20 times. Always got to get the manuscript pages. So we'll jump forward a little bit. I want to show you guys some of the stuff with the enemies. One thing I really like is tactics and multi-attacks were actually very important to Remedy. So they made sure that different character groups that attack you not only have different ways of attacking you, they're all mostly melee. They didn't want a game where you were having that issue where you were just ranging one another. But they not only have different ways to attack you, and of course the enemies can throw, the one type of enemy can throw their axes, you also have that desire on the enemy's part to attack you up close with multiple characters. They do not just do it once. So if you focus your flashlight on one character, other characters will attack you. They will all attack you at once. And that was their desire, Remedy's desire, to keep the game player continually moving, to make sure that there was no safe tower, no respite, no moment of comfort that you could just sort of solidify yourself and hide. I've tried it. I've hid in caves. I've hid in all kinds of different locations. And in the end, the enemy will always get you. They will always prop up behind you. They will always end up finding you. And you have to keep moving, otherwise you will die. There's multiple cars in the game, all with different handling aspects, some better than others. But it's that reminder of that open world path that they had originally gone with. And you can get all kinds of vehicles in this game. All of them have different damage handling. There was a space before here that I didn't show you guys where there was, matter of fact, it's the first place where you drive a car where you can go for a long ways and really explore the world a little bit in this vehicle. And it makes the world feel just far more tangible. And here's the thing that I think is really cool. From a gameplay element, the bigger the world is and the more interactivity and the more realistic it is, the less you question if Alan Wake is faking it. It's also at times when there's a movie and you're trying to figure out if it's all in the character's head. But if it is all in the character's head and you see another character in a cutscene that isn't that character doing stuff completely separate, then you start to wonder, well, why would we see that? Like, how would we, if it's not from his focal point, if it's not from his viewpoint, then there's actually something else going on. It can't just be just that character. I think that that's awesome. Such a great way of handling things. And it's done quite often in Alan Wake. So we'll close this up. One of the last things I want to show you guys so that you understand about the open world constantly being there is we're going to use the free camera. Now, the free camera is available as a developer tool, of course, in the 360 version, but in the PC version, you can get to it fairly easy, and you can have a free camera and you can look at the world, and you can see that the open world actually exists, and this is it. So you can zoom out here, and you can see Alan there. Everything within the world is still being simulated and rendered here. Now, I'll probably get lost, but I will show you, of course, the volumetric, all of that fog and those clouds actually being used. Now, you will see some places where they've obviously, like here, where they've decided that no one was going to go there originally. But again, you can see that this entire world is open, and you can zoom in, and there's actual grass on the ground and stuff like that. And so you can see that this is still being simulated. This open world is still there. It's just that they decided that you weren't going to actually be able to do it. And it's sort of, it doesn't necessarily put to rest the fact that the open world wouldn't have been possible, but you can obviously see here, aside from that they didn't load in that texture there on the window. Or it'd be a reflection, so they wouldn't want to load that in. But you can see that everything is here, you know? Everything is actually in this location. And you can go out, you can zoom up, see that that's great. You can see everything. You can see just how big some of this location is. So that sort of shows you what was available in the open world, or what could have been. I'm very happy they didn't go open world with this. I think it was a much better idea to handle this the way they did. Let's drop back in. Okay. Oh, got to wait for the textures to load in. Let's get back out. Look at that. Oh, so great. Just everything about it. Such a phenomenal title when it comes down to it, both technically and just as a gameplay piece. You know, I talk about reflection of life. There isn't a ton in this game because they turned off a lot of those, you know, the systems that would normally run that. But the fact that you can zoom in almost anywhere and still see that the game world exists is really great. This is a prior part of the level. And just, it runs great. Still fairly high frame rate. You can see that there was a lot there to be offered. There was a lot that they were going to be able to show. Again, like I said, I'm actually very happy they didn't go the route of having it be an open world. It is a horror game, and that is possible to do. But I think for Alan Wake itself and the narrative that's occurring there, let's see if we can get up a good side shot of Alan Wake. There we go. I think it was perfect. There's that light again. The two dual beams, exactly what a flashlight does. Oh. His chainsaw. So one of the characters in the insane asylum's name is Odin. They're a rock band. And his chainsaw, of course, is named Thor. And we'll zoom back to the very start. Ooh, a little bit of a frame rate hitch. Sorry, that's shadow play. Acting up again. Acting the fool. This is the very start when you get in the car wreck. I love the hints about what's going on, safety and light. And of course, cancer from not being able to run. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. I hope you guys like these videos. They're enjoyable to do. If you do, hit thumbs up. If you dislike the video, hit thumbs down. Maybe share it. Maybe post it on a forum. Talk to other people about it. And as always, peace out. My name is Alan Wake, and I have severe lung cancer from breathing in different particles from this tweed jacket. Can't run for very long. God, what a wussy. Can't walk more than 4 feet. I love that even at the starting of this place, you have this open world already being viewable. If this was any other game, any other level, there'd be some cliff there or something that just didn't make a lot of sense. And here you just see it goes off. And it goes off into real polygons, not some kind of 2D painting or something like that. You can already see, oh, coffee is power. Must get coffee thermos. It would have been such an odd game had coffee been health. I don't think I would have enjoyed it. Oh, anyway. So, as I said, peace out, and Happy New Year's to people.